The galaxy was vast, ancient, and indifferent. For eons, it had been a theater of endless wars, alliances, and betrayals among countless species. Empires rose and fell, their ruins scattered across the stars like forgotten whispers. Yet, in all its sprawling complexity, there was one constant truth. Humanity was gone, or so everyone believed. The Eridani Dominion, a race of crystalline intellects whose thoughts resonated in perfect harmony, had declared humanity extinct over 3 centuries ago. Their fleets had swept through Sol like a storm of fire and light, reducing Earth to a smoldering husk and scattering its colonies into oblivion. To the galaxy at large, humanity's end was a footnote in the chronicles of conquest, a primitive species that had dared to challenge the inevitable and paid the price. But the galaxy didn't know the whole story. In the cold void between stars, where even light seemed hesitant to travel, a single ship drifted silently. Its hull was matte black, absorbing every photon that dared touch it. To sensors, it was invisible. To scanners, it was nothing more than an anomaly, a ripple in space-time that could be dismissed as background noise. Inside this ghost ship, however, humanity's last hope stirred. Captain Adrian Holt stood on the bridge of the Aegis, his eyes fixed on the holographic display before him. The map of the galaxy shimmered in shades of blue and red, marking territories controlled by alien powers. The Eridani Dominion's reach stretched like a cancerous web across sectors that once teemed with human life. Holt's jaw tightened as he traced their expansion with his gaze. "Status report," he barked. Lieutenant Kara Sato turned from her console, her face illuminated by the soft glow of her screen. "Stealth systems are holding steady. No sign we've been detected. And the payload?" "Stable," she replied. "But we're running out of time. The antimatter cores won't stay dormant forever." Holt nodded grimly. The Aegis wasn't just a ship. It was a weapon, a relic of desperation forged in humanity's darkest hour. After Earth fell, the survivors had scattered to hidden colonies on barren moons and asteroid belts, eking out an existence while their enemies hunted them down one by one. But even as their numbers dwindled, humanity had not surrendered. In secret facilities buried deep beneath alien worlds, they had built ships like the Aegis, ships designed not for survival, but for vengeance. "Do you think they'll remember us?" Sato asked quietly. Holt turned to her, his expression unreadable. "They'll remember," he said after a moment, "but not as we were. They'll remember what we become." The Aegis wasn't alone. Across the galaxy, other ships lay dormant, waiting for their moment to strike. Each carried a piece of humanity's final gamble, a technology so advanced it bordered on magic, a fusion of quantum mechanics and dark energy manipulation that defied conventional understanding. It was called the Catalyst Drive, and it could do more than destroy planets. It could rewrite reality itself. The plan was simple in its audacity. Strike at the heart of the Eridani Dominion and unleash the Catalyst Drives in unison. The resulting chain reaction would create a singularity, a controlled collapse of space-time that would obliterate the Dominion's core systems while leaving humanity's hidden enclaves untouched. It was a suicide mission for those aboard the ships, but a chance for humanity to rise from its ashes. As Holt stared into the void beyond the bridge's viewport, he felt the weight of history pressing down on him. He wasn't just leading a mission. He was carrying the hopes and dreams of an entire species on his shoulders. "Prepare for jump," he ordered. Sato hesitated. "Sir, if this works..." "When this works," Holt corrected her. She nodded slowly and turned back to her console. The hum of the ship's engines deepened as power surged through its systems. Outside, space seemed to ripple as the Aegis activated its jump drive. Holt closed his eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. He thought of Earth, not as it was during its final days, but as it had been in its prime. Oceans sparkling under golden suns, cities alive with laughter and music, children playing beneath skies untouched by war. "We're still here," he whispered to himself. And then they were gone, a flash of light in an uncaring void, hurtling toward destiny. The Aegis emerged from the jump with a shudder that rippled through its hull. For a moment, The ship hung in the void, its systems recalibrating to the new coordinates. Around it, the stars burned cold and distant, their light faint against the oppressive darkness of deep space. Captain Adrian Holt steadied himself against the command console as the ship's artificial gravity stabilized. "Report," he ordered, his voice sharp. Lieutenant Carasato's fingers danced across her console, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Jump successful. We're holding position just outside the designated coordinates. No immediate signs of detection." Holt exhaled slowly, but his relief was short-lived. He turned to the tactical officer, Ensign Malik Torres, who was hunched over his station, his eyes scanning a flood of data on his screen. "Torres, what's our proximity to Eridani patrol routes?" "Close," Torres replied grimly. "Too close. Their long-range sensors might pick up residual distortions from our jump if we linger here." "Then we won't linger," Holt said firmly. "Sato, bring up visuals of the target system." The holographic display in the center of the bridge flickered to life, projecting an image of their destination, Zeta Orgi Prime, one of the Eridani Dominion's core worlds. The planet glowed with an eerie luminescence, its surface crisscrossed by vast networks of crystalline cities that pulsed with energy. Orbiting it were dozens of defense platforms and warships, an impenetrable fortress by any standard. But Holt wasn't interested in Zeta Orgi Prime itself. His focus was on something far more important: the Dominion's central nexus station, a massive construct suspended in orbit above the planet like a spider at the heart of its web. It was there that the Eridani stored their collective consciousness, a vast repository of knowledge and power that allowed them to coordinate their empire with flawless precision. Destroying it would cripple them, but reaching it was another matter entirely. "Any sign of our fleet?" Holt asked. Sato shook her head. "Not yet. If they're following protocol, they'll remain cloaked until we initiate Phase 1. Holt nodded. The Aegis was part of a coordinated strike involving 9 other ships, each equipped with a catalyst drive and tasked with targeting key Dominion installations across their core systems. The timing had to be perfect. Even a slight delay could spell disaster. But before he could issue his next command, an alarm blared across the bridge. "Captain," Torres shouted, his voice tight with urgency. "We've got an incoming transmission, encrypted and on an old Terran frequency." Holt's stomach tightened. No one outside their network should have access to those frequencies, not unless something had gone catastrophically wrong. "Patch it through," he said. The main display shifted, and static filled the air before resolving into an image that made Holt's blood run cold. It was Commander Elena Markov, captain of the Resolute, one of their sister ships in the fleet. Her face was pale, her expression grim. "Adrian," she began without preamble, "we have a problem." "What kind of problem?" Holt demanded. Markov hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough for him to know it was bad. "It's Earth," she said finally. Holt felt as though the air had been sucked from his lungs. Earth was gone, destroyed centuries ago by the Eridani in their campaign to wipe out humanity. "What could possibly?" "We've been monitoring subspace anomalies near Sol," Markov continued quickly, as if sensing his confusion. "Something unnatural is happening there." "Unnatural how?" Sato interjected. Markov glanced away from her screen for a moment, as though consulting someone off camera. When she looked back, her voice was lower, almost trembling. "The ruins of Earth are changing." Holt frowned deeply. "Changing? Be specific." "The planet's surface is reforming," Markov explained hurriedly. "We're picking up massive energy readings, off the charts, and gravitational distortions that shouldn't be possible without external manipulation. It's as if something is rebuilding Earth from scratch." Silence fell over the bridge as her words sank in. "That's impossible," Torres muttered under his breath. "It gets worse," Markov added grimly. "We've detected Eridani ships converging on Sol from multiple sectors, not just patrols, but full battle fleets." Holt's mind raced. If Earth was somehow being reconstructed, and if it was drawing this level of attention from the Dominion, it could only mean one thing. Someone or something had activated ancient human technology buried deep within the planet's core during its final days. The catalyst drives weren't humanity's only secret weapon. Do you think it's one of ours? Sato asked quietly. It has to be, Holt replied after a moment. The Eridani wouldn't go to these lengths unless they saw it as a threat. Markov nodded grimly on the display. We don't have all the details yet. We're too far out to get clear readings, but whatever is happening there is big enough to change everything. Holt clenched his fists at his sides as conflicting emotions surged through him. Hope at the possibility that Earth might not be lost forever, and dread at what this development could mean for their mission. We can't divert now, he said finally, his voice firm despite the turmoil inside him. If we abandon our targets to investigate Sol, we lose our chance to strike at the Dominion where it hurts most. But if this is what I think it is, Markov began hesitantly. I know, Holt interrupted sharply. He took a deep breath and forced himself to focus. Send me all your data on Sol and keep monitoring from your position, but stay cloaked and don't engage unless absolutely necessary. Markov hesitated again before nodding reluctantly. Understood. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving only silence in its wake. What do we do now? Sato asked after a long pause. Holt stared at Zeta Origi Prime on the display, the heart of their enemy's power, and then glanced at another section of space marked by nothing but darkness. Sol system. We stick to the plan, he said finally, though his voice carried an edge of uncertainty even he couldn't suppress. For now, humanity's vengeance would have to wait, but whatever was happening on Earth would not be ignored for long. The bridge of the Aegis was a hive of controlled chaos. The faint hum of the ship's systems filled the air, punctuated by the sharp beeps and chirps of consoles processing streams of data. Captain Adrian Holt stood at the center, his hands clasped tightly behind his back, his gaze fixed on the holographic projection of Zeta Origi Prime. The countdown timer in the corner of the display ticked down relentlessly, each second bringing them closer to the moment that would decide humanity's fate. All ships report readiness, Lieutenant Kara Sato announced, her voice steady despite the tension that gripped the crew. The Resolute, Vanguard, and Eclipse are in position near their targets. The others are holding at designated coordinates. Holt nodded but didn't look away from the display. And the catalyst drives? Fully armed and synchronized, Sato replied. Once we initiate the sequence, there's no turning back. Holt's jaw tightened. He had known this moment would come, had prepared for it, trained for it. But now that it was here, he felt the weight of it pressing down on him like a physical force. This wasn't just a battle. It was an act of defiance against an enemy that had sought to erase humanity from existence. It was a declaration that they were still here, still fighting, and still dangerous. Torres, Holt said sharply, turning to his tactical officer. What's the status of Dominion defenses? Ensign Malik Torres didn't look up from his console as he answered. Their orbital platforms are fully operational and scanning for anomalies, but they haven't detected us yet. Fleet activity is normal. Patrols are cycling through standard routes with no signs of heightened alertness. Good, Holt said. Let's keep it that way. He turned back to Sato. Begin Phase 1. Sato nodded and entered a series of commands into her console. On the holographic display, a new set of icons appeared, small, barely noticeable blips moving towards Zeta Origi Prime and its surrounding defenses. Decoys deployed, Sato reported. They'll mimic low-level energy signatures consistent with rogue debris fields or minor system malfunctions. The decoys were one of humanity's most ingenious creations. Tiny drones equipped with advanced cloaking technology and designed to emit false signals that could confuse even the most sophisticated sensors. As they drifted closer to their targets, they would create the illusion of harmless anomalies, just enough to draw attention away from the real threat. Let's see if they take the bait, Holt muttered. Minutes passed in tense silence as the crew watched the display. Slowly but surely, Dominion patrols began to shift their trajectories, moving to investigate the decoys. One by one, orbital defense platforms adjusted their targeting arrays, scanning for threats that didn't exist. They're buying it, Torres said with a hint of disbelief in his voice. Holt allowed himself a small smile. They think they're invincible, he said quietly. That's their weakness. But even as he spoke, he knew this was only the beginning. The Dominion's arrogance might have made them complacent, but their technology was still far superior to anything humanity had ever created, except for one thing: the catalyst drive. Phase 2. Hold ordered. Sato hesitated for just a fraction of a second before nodding and entering another set of commands. Across the galaxy, hidden in pockets of space where even light dared not venture, 9 other ships received their signal. On board each vessel, crews sprang into action, activating systems that had been dormant for years. Engines roared to life as stealth fields disengaged and targeting arrays locked onto their designated objectives. The Resolute, positioned near a Dominion shipyard in the Epsilon sector, powered up its catalyst drive with a low hum that resonated through its hull like a heartbeat. Captain Elena Markov stood on her own bridge, her face illuminated by the cold blue glow of her console screens. She didn't flinch as alarms blared around her or as Dominion ships began to converge on her position. "Hold steady," she commanded her crew. "We only get one shot at this." Back on the Aegis, Sato monitored their progress closely. "The Resolute is engaging," she reported. "The Vanguard is moving into position near Beta Crucis Station. Catalyst drives are charging across all vessels." Holt nodded but said nothing. His focus was absolute, his mind racing through every possible scenario and contingency plan. And then it began. The first detonation came from Epsilon sector, a blinding flash of light that erupted from deep within Dominion territory as the Resolute unleashed its catalyst drive on the shipyard. The energy wave rippled outward like a shockwave through water, tearing through Eridani ships and installations with devastating precision. "Direct hit," Torres exclaimed, his voice filled with both awe and disbelief. "The entire shipyard is gone. No survivors." Before anyone could react, another explosion rocked Beta Crucis Station as the Vanguard completed its mission. One by one, reports came in from across the galaxy. Dominion outposts obliterated, fleets scattered, entire systems plunged into chaos. But it wasn't just destruction, it was disruption on a scale no one had ever seen before. The catalyst drives didn't just destroy physical structures. They destabilized space-time itself in localized areas, creating gravitational anomalies that rendered entire sectors uninhabitable for decades or even centuries. On Zeta Orgi Prime, alarms blared as Dominion forces scrambled to respond to what they now realized was an orchestrated attack. Patrols abandoned their search for decoys and rushed back toward the planet's defense grid, but it was too late. "Their fleet is repositioning," Torres reported breathlessly. "They're leaving gaps in their perimeter." Holt seized the opportunity without hesitation. "Bring us in," he ordered. The Aegis surged forward under full power, its stealth system still active as it slipped through cracks in the Dominion's defenses like a shadow in the night. Around them, other human ships followed suit, each carrying its own catalyst drive and heading straight for its target. As they approached Zeta Orgi Prime's central nexus station, the heart of Dominion power, Holt felt a surge of adrenaline unlike anything he'd ever experienced before. This was it, the moment humanity had been waiting for. "Prepare to deploy the payload," he commanded. Sato glanced at him nervously, but obeyed without question. On her console screen, a countdown timer appeared, 60 seconds until detonation. "Once we release it," Holt said quietly but firmly, addressing his crew one last time, "there's no going back." No one responded aloud, but in their eyes, he saw resolve stronger than steel. The final act had begun, and there would be no mercy for those who had tried to erase them from existence. The Aegis roared through the void, its engines pushing it to the brink of their designed capacity. Around it, the other human ships of the Vengeance fleet emerged from their cloaked positions like specters in the night, each a harbinger of destruction. The Dominion's defenses were scrambling now, their once perfect formations fracturing as panic spread through their ranks. The catalyst drive detonations across the galaxy had shattered not only their infrastructure, but also their unshakable confidence. For the first time in centuries, the Eridani Dominion knew fear. "Captain, we're entering the outer perimeter of Zeta Orgi Prime's defense grid," Lieutenant Carasato reported, her voice taut with tension. Enemy platforms are locking on, multiple targeting arrays coming online. Evasive maneuvers, Captain Adrian Holt barked. Deploy countermeasures. The Aegis veered sharply to port as streams of plasma fire and energy lances streaked toward it from the orbital defense platforms. Automated turrets mounted on the ship's hull sprang to life, launching clouds of microdrones that swarmed toward incoming projectiles, detonating them mid-flight in bursts of light and shrapnel. The bridge shook violently as a near miss sent shockwaves rippling through the ship. Shields holding at 73%. Ensign Malik Torres called out from his tactical station. But we can't take too many hits like that. We won't need to, Holt replied grimly. Sato, status on the fleet? Resolute and Vanguard are engaging enemy patrols near the primary defense line, Sato said, her fingers flying across her console. Eclipse is moving to flank the orbital platforms on our starboard side. The others are holding position and charging their catalyst drives. Holt nodded, his mind racing as he processed the rapidly changing battlefield. The plan was unfolding as expected, for now, but he knew better than to assume victory was assured. The Eridani were wounded, but they were far from defeated. Bring us into attack range of the Nexus station, he ordered. We'll punch a hole through their defenses and clear a path for the payload. The holographic display in front of him shifted to show their primary target. The Dominion's central Nexus station, a massive crystalline structure suspended in orbit above Zeta Orgi Prime. Its surface shimmered with an otherworldly light, and streams of energy flowed between its spires like rivers of liquid fire. This was the heart of the Eridani Dominion, the source of their power and coordination. Destroying it would cripple them beyond recovery. But reaching it would not be easy. As the Aegis surged forward, a swarm of Dominion warships descended upon them like a flock of predatory birds. Sleek and angular, their crystalline hulls refracted light into dazzling patterns that belied their lethal intent. Energy beams lanced out from their weapons arrays, converging on the human fleet with deadly precision. Enemy ships incoming, Torres shouted. 37 vessels on intercept course, frigates and cruisers, supported by heavy carriers. Divert power to forward shields, Holt commanded. And tell Eclipse to focus fire on those carriers. We can't let them launch fighters. The Eclipse, a smaller but heavily armed frigate, broke formation and unleashed a volley of railgun slugs at one of the Dominion carriers. The projectile struck with devastating force, shattering sections of its crystalline hull and sending debris spiraling into space. But even as it reeled from the attack, swarms of Eridani fighter drones poured from its hangars like angry hornets. Fighters inbound, Sato warned. Holt gritted his teeth as he watched the swarm close in on their position. The drones were fast and agile, each equipped with energy weapons capable of overwhelming shields through sheer volume of fire. Activate point defense systems, he ordered. The Aegis's hull bristled with automated turrets that swiveled to track the incoming drones. Streams of tracer rounds and flak bursts filled the space around them, cutting down dozens of drones in seconds. But for every one destroyed, two more seemed to take its place. They're overwhelming our defenses, Torres shouted over the din of alarms blaring across the bridge. We don't need to fight them all, Holt said tightly. Just keep them off us long enough to reach the station. As if on cue, another human ship, the Vanguard, swooped in from above, its missile bays unleashing a barrage that tore through one of the Dominion frigates blocking their path. The explosion lit up the darkness like a miniature supernova, momentarily blinding sensors on both sides. Path is opening, Sato called out. Holt seized the opportunity without hesitation. Full speed ahead, all power to engines. The Aegis surged forward like an arrow loosed from a bow, its engines burning white-hot as it barreled toward the Nexus station. Around it, chaos reigned as human ships clashed with Dominion forces in a desperate battle for survival. As they closed in on their target, Holt's gaze fell on the countdown timer displayed on his console. 180 seconds until catalyst drive activation. We're almost there, he muttered under his breath. But just as hope began to rise within him, a new threat emerged. a massive Eridani dreadnought that loomed ahead like a mountain carved from crystal and light. Its weapons arrays glowed ominously as it turned to face them. "Dreadnought dead ahead," Torres shouted. Holt's mind raced as he calculated their odds. The dreadnought was too large and too well-armed for them to defeat head-on, but they didn't need to destroy it. They just needed to get past it. "Sato," he said sharply, "prepare for emergency maneuvers." Sato's eyes widened in alarm, but nodded quickly. "Understood." Holt turned back to Torres. "Target its weapon systems. Disable them if you can." "Aye, Captain," Torres replied grimly. The Aegis veered sharply as it approached the dreadnought, weaving through streams of plasma fire and energy beams that lit up space like fireworks. Its turrets fired relentlessly at weak points along the dreadnought's hull, trying to find any vulnerability they could exploit. Finally, one shot hit home. A railgun slug punched through an exposed section near one of its main batteries, triggering a chain reaction that sent explosions rippling across its surface. "It's losing power," Torres exclaimed. "Good," Holt said tightly. "Now get us past it before reinforcements arrive." The Aegis shot past the crippled dreadnought like a comet streaking through space. And there it was, the Nexus station looming ahead in all its terrible beauty. "Target locked," Sato reported breathlessly. Holt stared at it for a moment longer before giving his final order. "Deploy the payload." "Deploy the payload," Captain Adrian Holt commanded, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around him. The bridge of the Aegis shook violently as another near-miss from an Eridani frigate's energy lance sent shockwaves rippling through the ship's hull. Sparks flew from overloaded consoles, and alarms blared incessantly, but no one on the bridge faltered. Every member of the crew knew what was at stake. Lieutenant Kara Sato's fingers danced across her console, bypassing safety protocols and initiating the final sequence. The catalyst drive, humanity's ultimate weapon, began to hum with a low, resonant vibration that seemed to echo through the very fabric of space. On the holographic display, a countdown appeared, 60 seconds until detonation. "All systems online," Sato reported, her voice tight with focus. "The catalyst drive is primed and locked onto the Nexus station." Holt nodded, his gaze fixed on the massive crystalline structure that loomed ahead of them. The Dominion's Nexus station was a marvel of alien engineering, its spires glowing with an eerie light as streams of energy pulsed between them like veins carrying lifeblood. It was beautiful in its way, a monument to the Eridani's dominance over the galaxy. But to Holt, it was a symbol of everything humanity had suffered, and it was about to be destroyed. Enemy ships closing in, Ensign Malik Torres shouted from his tactical station. Frigates and cruisers on all sides, dreadnought regaining power. "We're completely surrounded." Holt clenched his fists as he assessed their situation. The Dominion forces were converging on them like wolves circling wounded prey. The Aegis's shields were failing, its weapon systems were nearly depleted, and there was no chance of escape. But escape had never been part of the plan. "We hold," Holt said firmly. "No matter what happens, we hold." The crew didn't respond with words. They didn't need to. Their resolve was etched into every movement, every action they took as they fought to protect the ship long enough for the catalyst drive to complete its cycle. "Vanguard is taking heavy fire," Sato called out. "They're shielding us from the dreadnought." On the display, Holt saw the Vanguard, its hull battered and burning, positioning itself between the Aegis and the massive Eridani warship. It unleashed a final volley of missiles before succumbing to a barrage of plasma fire that tore it apart in a brilliant explosion. "They knew what they signed up for," Holt said quietly, his voice tinged with both sorrow and pride. "We all did." The countdown ticked down relentlessly, 30 seconds. Outside, the battle raged on. Human ships darted through the void like fireflies in a storm, their weapons blazing as they engaged Dominion forces in desperate dogfights. The Resolute rammed an Eridani cruiser head-on, detonating its own catalyst drive in a suicidal act that created a localized singularity, swallowing both ships and several nearby fighters in a swirling vortex of energy. "Singularity detected near Sector 7, Torres reported. The Resolute is gone, but they took half the enemy fleet with them. Holt didn't flinch. Every loss was a wound to his soul, but he couldn't afford to mourn. Not yet. 15 seconds. The Nexus station began to glow brighter as it activated its own defenses. Beams of concentrated energy lanced out toward the Aegis, slicing through space with terrifying precision. Evasive maneuvers, Holt shouted. The ship lurched violently as Sato pushed its engines to their limits, narrowly avoiding one beam only to be clipped by another. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks, and one crew member was thrown from their station, their body limp as it hit the deck. Shields at critical levels. Torres yelled over the din. Hold steady. Holt barked back. 10 seconds. The hum of the catalyst drive grew louder, resonating through every fiber of their being. It wasn't just sound, it was something deeper, something primal that seemed to vibrate within their very atoms. The air on the bridge felt charged with electricity, as if reality itself was holding its breath. Captain, Sato said quietly, her voice trembling for the first time. It's been an honor. Holt turned to her and gave a small nod. For all of us? 5 seconds. The Dominion forces closed in for the kill. Fighters swarmed around them like angry insects. Frigates unleashed volleys of plasma fire that tore into what remained of their armor plating. And behind it all, the dreadnought loomed like an executioner raising its blade. But none of it mattered anymore. 3, 2, 1. Detonate, Holt said softly. And then everything changed. The catalyst drive unleashed its full power in an explosion that defied comprehension. It wasn't just light or heat or force. It was something far greater, something that rippled through space-time itself like a stone dropped into an infinite pond. The Nexus station disintegrated instantly, its crystalline spires shattering into countless fragments that dissolved into nothingness as waves of energy consumed them. But it didn't stop there. The shockwaves spread outward in all directions, tearing through Dominion ships and installations with unstoppable force. Their dreadnoughts crumbled like sandcastles before a tidal wave. Their fleets were scattered like leaves in a storm. Their networks collapsed as their central consciousness, the heart of their empire, was obliterated in an instant. On Zeta Orgi Prime below, cities built over millennia flickered and died as power grids failed and infrastructure crumbled under the weight of cascading failures. The Eridani themselves, beings whose minds were linked across vast distances, screamed silently as their connection was severed forever. And at the center of it all was humanity, a species they had tried to erase from existence, but which had risen from its ashes stronger than ever before. As the light faded and silence returned to space, what remained of humanity's fleet regrouped near what had once been Zeta Orgi Prime's orbit. The Aegis drifted among them, battered but intact, a testament to their resilience. Holt stood on the bridge, staring out at the debris field that stretched before them, a graveyard for an empire that had thought itself eternal. It's over, Sato said softly beside him. Holt shook his head slowly. No, he replied. It's just beginning, for humanity had not only survived, it had triumphed against impossible odds. And now, scattered across hidden colonies and forgotten worlds, they would rebuild, not just for themselves, but for every species oppressed by those who believe themselves invincible. The galaxy would remember this day, not as humanity's end, but as its rebirth. And this time, humanity would not be forgotten again.